ourselves into, which is a sad time, and yet there could never be a better time. I know that Leslie would have appreciated the timing of this better than anyone. So, should we maybe ask Roseanne if there's a nigun that comes to your mind? Unless somebody has one that's just... It's actually traditional during the week of Shiva, which is just ended, to study a little bit. And depending upon how orthodox you are about this, depends upon what you study. There could be nothing more, it's more traditional than studying about death at such a time. It's the most sobering. So I will invite everyone, I know this is not everybody's tradition, but those of us who would like to say thank you for this moment in time, Holy One, for letting me be able to, first of all, have time to study and to be here to study. Because when you lose someone close to you, you realize part of what they're missing is this joy that we're experiencing to be able to study together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. And everybody who hasn't said the prayer says, Amen, which is worth even more than the prayer, actually. You're supposed to give 100 blessings a day, 100 brachot, and 90 responses, only 90. And the answer is, why 90 versus 100? First of all, why 100? Why should you have to say 100 blessings a day?
Constant consciousness.
Right, and the dead cannot perform mitzvot. And every blessing is one. And this is one way that we express gratitude that we have a life, so that we can, in fact, say these blessings. And it keeps us full of radical amazement. That this life is brief. It is, as we say, death is a night between 2 days. So, and then the other reason, so why 90? It's because if you have enough humility, not too much, as we say, Yish gaiva, or pride, you always have to be the one to say the bracha. That you listen to somebody else say the blessing, and you're willing to say Amen. That little bit of modesty and humility counts for the extra 10. So it's worth it as much. I always ask this question for certain classes, but never more so in this one. And what I'd like to do is to begin by going around the room and introducing ourselves, one, and two, why we've chosen to take the class. And I'm going to begin because I have a certain amount of guidelines. Because I think that behavior is contagious, and that hopefully, if I feel safe enough to speak my truth with you, it'll encourage others to speak theirs. So I'm Rabbi Malka, and I've been thinking about teaching this class for a year because we moved. Because of Leslie. And as I said at her funeral on Monday, that this community began at the same time as she was diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer. And some of us, like Ellen Fox, were right there in the very beginning. Malka was right there in the beginning. And this community knew its purpose and its meaning immediately, like children who grow up with a sick parent know something that others don't. Please. So, I said to Leslie many times that I really radically prefer Rosh Hashanahs to weeks like this one. Some rabbis are really good at graveside, and some rabbis are not. I have trouble even with Kol Nidre, having the right gravitas for the moment. And I thought that teaching this class would help prepare me for what we thought was likely, but never gave up hope to the last breath would not happen in this class. So I confess my own discomfort with the subject. Some of you know that I refer to death as temporary setback, so that's another way of looking at it. And there is a part of me, and as we go more deeply into this course, we'll see that I didn't just make this up. That Judaism does in fact believe in transmigration of souls, does believe in angels, does believe in afterlife, all of that stuff. So we'll talk about that Thursday night for our last class. That's as much as I want to say right now and sort of give the room to everybody who's here.
I'm Cindy Friedman. Well, I'm here for many, many reasons. Rabbi Malka, in addition to being a close friend, is one of my teachers, and so I'm drawn to hear what her guidance, and also the subject. And I thought intuitively for the longest time after the date was set for this class that Leslie was going to leave us this week. I just sort of had that feeling.
Because she hated interrupting the schedule, changing time.
You know, she. So that's kind of amazing. I learned so much on so many levels from Leslie in her dying and in our discussions about her dying. And although I've lost other loved ones in my life, I've never had the honesty, the deeply honest discussions about death, about what's afterwards, what she thought was going to be there, what I thought was going to be there. It was totally amazing and beautiful and intense. And like many people, I'm grieving very much now. And so I'm vulnerable and I'm open. And so all this can come into me and kind of find a place. I'll let some of it in now and kind of deal with the rest of it as I can. So that's where I am in the moment.
You could, if you can, just a couple of sentences about your meeting with them.
Sure. For those who I haven't met before, I'm the cantor here at Hamakom. But I met Leslie on the phone. I had heard about a Seder that was going to happen with Hamakom. I was 3 weeks after surgery for uterine cancer. And and had also just ended a 19-year relationship. And I left a message on the Hamakom phone message, and Leslie, as president, called me back. And I told her my situation. We had gay block in common, so we sort of knew about each other. And she said, well, you should come to the Seder. And I said, I don't know, I'm so sick, I'm so sore, I can hardly walk, and I'm crying constantly. I'm so depressed. I mean, I just said, and she said, come anyway. And I did. And that's where I met Leslie. And she was such an important part of my healing and my recovery. We had the same oncologist, we had the same zipper. And as I began to heal, she helped me so much, even with yoga. And we started doing yoga together. And she told me on the phone that she had ovarian cancer and that her yoga and her Judaism were helping her through it. And the balance of those two just, was great. And one of these things that often happens once in a lifetime, we bonded so intensely and so deeply, so fast. It's like we had different childhoods together. That friendship with a girlfriend you grew up with, that's what I had with Leslie, even though we only knew each other for these 2 years. So that's how I came into Hong Kong. And her push and Malka's push, I just was like, I'm on this huge learning curve, and it's been amazing, continues to be an amazing journey. And then I ended up singing at her funeral, was still kind of mind-blowing in a pure sense of that expression. Who could have predicted that, and who could describe that, and that I would even have that experience. I've sung at funerals many times as a singer, but in this way was something I'll never forget.
I'm Ava Salmon, and member of Hamacom in the Benedict Sport class because of Leslie, having organized the class for us and having kept after me to give it a try. I'm here because, as Cindy said, and Rev Malka, Leslie calls you, is our teacher, and whatever you have to say, I'm really interested in hearing it and being part of it. And also, hopefully by understanding this process more, God forbid this happens again in our, we will have more challenges in our community. I want to be knowledgeable about how I can participate fully and help out in the future. That's why we're in the Benedict class, so that we can be more part of the Shabbat Seder's and to have more leaders in the community. So I'm here to learn more so I can be of service.
I'm Ellen Fox, and I met Leslie before there was a Hong Kong, and she was one of the first friends I had in Santa Fe. And so her death has been difficult for me this week, and I've also been surrounded by the deaths of others not close to me, but close to people who are close to me. One friend's mother, who she had a really horrible relationship with, but it was nonetheless a very painful experience for her when her mother passed away, and another friend whose little grandson died unexpectedly. So I took this class from Malka several years ago when she did it, and I remember at the time feeling so grateful for everything that I learned, and I feel like I now have reached a new level of need for your wisdom. So that's why I'm
You can remind me where I've gotten.
Ruth Ann Faust, eventually to be a full-time resident, but right now between Connecticut and Santa Fe. My journey began 21 years ago when my mom got sarcoma, and it took her only 1 year to go through the whole process, all the fight, and to her death. And I remember at the time, hospice was very new, and at the time they wouldn't give you medication because they were afraid you might become an addict. So we've come a long way since then. But I was gifted with an experience with her a few days before she died. She'd been in a terrible amount of pain, and she had actually asked my husband, who was working as a physician at the time, to bring up from Kentucky, where we were living, kind of a wandering Jew, medication so that if she needed to end her life, she just didn't feel like she could handle the pain. And I was in such turmoil over that request. My husband had absolutely no problem satisfying that, but it certainly made us all determined to go to her doctors and say, this is ridiculous. Give her a break. But nothing did it until one afternoon I was sitting with her alone, with 2 little children at the time downstairs making a lot of noise. And my mom went into this kind of meditative state, and from total agony and pain, her body totally relaxed, the entire room got electrified, and she started to giggle like a little girl. And I can't tell you whether it was 30 seconds or 30 minutes. But when she came out of it, I told her I thought something special had happened. Could she tell me about it? And she described the Kubler-Ross tunnel and the light of love, and her parents at the end of the tunnel going, "It's not your turn yet." And it was like she was a 7-year-old who just turned around and skipped out of her tunnel. And the truth is, it was almost her time. Her body needed about 3 more days. But at that point, she no longer wanted to interact with us. And it began my journey, actually. All of a sudden, my kids who had been entertainment to her were making noise that she couldn't handle. But it began a 20-year journey for me in death and dying and grief workshops and bereavement work. And in Connecticut, that's something that I do in pastoral counseling and stuff. So I find, as painful as this is, it's probably the most richest and deepest kind of connection to human beings. I mean, we're all there, we've all lost. And sometimes the losses are not a loved one as much as our physical losses. And there's just so many different levels of that. So I'm grateful to be in towns for this. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. It reminds me that there is I'm almost certain it's in Gomorrah, in Talmud, the expression that better to be in the house of mourning than in the banquet hall. And when I left Leslie's house about 2:30 in the morning, she died about 12:45. Being there, having gone through this process I'll describe, and hearing my footsteps as I returned to my house, and it wasn't with this profound gratitude of, oh, I'm alive. It was this incredibly sober experience, the most sober experience of my life, that from being in that house where death had come, I knew something about my life that and it's one of those things that we resist knowing. So as much as we try to run from it, and we'll talk a little bit later about the Shiva call and all of that we talked about, that information that we can only get at this stage by being near people who are taking this step is invaluable. I mean, it really is. It teaches to number our days. If we get ourselves a heart of wisdom, if we don't draw near to the dead, we're not going to get there. The other thing I'd like to ask everybody in their moments around the room is what questions you might have. I'll put out my question. My question has been, which goes to the subject today, which is sort of our spiritual legacy that we want to bequeath, or non-material wisdom, if you will, we want to bequeath. What can we ask of those who survive us in terms of ritual? What if your mother is an avowed atheist? That's not so hard because, you'll sit shiva if you want to. There's not much you can do about it. But what if it's the other way? What if your children are not so much into these rites? What if your mother insists on cremation? What will you say? So those are some of the questions I'm wrestling with, is that what's the sovereign principle regarding Jewish law? For those of us who are Jewish and understand the dilemma, so we can talk a little bit more about it. But those are some of the questions I have. But just in terms of writing an ethical will, what might we ask that may be, how consonant must it be with our children.
I'm halfway through my ethical will, and
Oh,
I've
good.
already notified my lawyer and told him how to find it on my computer.
Excellent.
But myself at the time, and really I kept getting this hit every time I went swimming actually. You have to do your ethical will.
Oh, great. Well, then you can then share your experience. This is wonderful having first-hand experience with doing this. Thank you. That's great. Carol.
I'm Carol McKendry, and I'm a member of Hamacombe. I'm no stranger to death. I almost didn't make it. I was a preemie, and that was my first encounter. My father died when I was 14. I've lost my mother, my brother, all my grandparents. And I've almost died twice in the last 15 years, once from illness, and I had closest I came was in a rafting accident, and I really had said goodbye. And I said the words, "I surrender." And it was the most incredible bliss I had ever felt in my life. I don't think I've ever had a higher moment, ever. I was this close, and from that moment, all I can say is a miracle happened. That's all I can say. So, in the last 2 weeks, Leslie and I met when our kids were in preschool together. We started the ski program together at Temple Beth Shalom. And I'll always remember Leslie as I just could never believe the way that woman could ski. It was just like, how do you do that? And Alan Lenetsky, who's a physician here in town, died in his sleep, and our kids we were all in the same preschool class. And my husband almost died 2 years ago from a diving accident. And so, and I see clients, a client of mine's wife just died 2 weeks ago, Christmas Eve. So, for me, Malka said something to me when we had coffee that I have not been able to let go of. You did it again, which is, she said the three things obviously are Jews are prayer, study, and service. And the thing that you're weakest on is the thing you need the most. And so for me, it's study. And so, Malka was my bat mitzvah rabbi, and I value you so much, Malka, and your heart and your wisdom. So for me, I'm here to just be part of this. I am tormented between cremation and being buried in the ground. So I'd like to have some help with that.
It's going to be a big conversation with you.
Yeah, a very tough one for me. And just at the life stage, we're friends, people, just any wisdom that can come from this tradition that I don't know much about, would be valued. So that's why I'm here. You got me again.
Baruch Hashem. Good. Glad you're here.
I'm Ellen Fox, number 2.
That's too What are your Hebrew names? We should really work on it.
Mine would be Esther. It's Esther.
Ellen?
Shoshana.
Oh, well, that's easy.
Okay, so
This
then,
is like us just turn this into hair. Good, there's Shoshana and Esther, we're fine.
I met Ellen at a Buddhist meditation retreat, actually. I'm here for a lot of reasons. The first one is I want to prepare for my own death. I really do. I don't know when it's going to happen, but I want to be prepared. And I know a lot more about, but although it's not a lot, that from the perspective of Dharma than I do from Judaism. I just lost a cousin 2 weeks ago. And his family was not, there was no Jewish, nothing. And so, and I've been really sick, and so I'm wanting to do some kind of ritual for him that I can do to acknowledge his transition. And there's no one to do Shiva, there's nothing. I mean, I have to kind of create it with a friend. I also, I didn't know Alan well, but I knew him, and that touched me. And then this young woman who was just bitten by a shark. And then last night I found out that one of my best friend's father has an extremely aggressive cancer. And I feel buffeted. It's like earthquakes, one after another. And I didn't know Leslie, and I would have been part of it, except that part of my struggle has been being very ill for the last 2 months. And so or even I would say 2 years and 2 months. I don't have a life-threatening illness, but I've had life-stealing illnesses. And I feel differently now. I feel like if I was gonna die, you know, I kind of, now maybe I'm talking off the top of my head, but I feel like a lot of the fear is gone. That I would go. You know, and I want to live full of the vibrancy and the passion that I'm used to, but I haven't had that in a long time. So, and I realized when Eric died that I really didn't know anything much about Jewish practice except Shiva. And that was out of the question. So I was very glad that you were doing this. Seems very timely, and it's not just as the beginning for me. I think this kind of learning and what I'm learning dharmically will really be my preparation. And I wanted so much to sit with Leslie at Vigil, even though she didn't know me, but I just wasn't well enough to get there. But I really did want to be there. And Rima described the washing of the body. And it was incredible just to hear it. And then finally, I have a lot of unfinished business with my mother's death, which I have to address at some point. And just all the grief in my family that was never given expression to. I'm carrying it. I don't want to carry it. I want to let go of it. So those are some of the reasons I'm here.
Well, you know, one of the, when we start to learn a little bit about, especially the Jewish Book of the Dead, like the Tibetan Book of the Dead, what the rituals are, that at first, if you come basically from a completely non-practicing family, as a tradition, it's going to be like, oh my God, you have to do this and this and this and then and then and then and then. It's like, you know, this Billy Lazar always says, why is Judaism so complicated? But actually, its intention is the opposite. Its intention is to put a limit to the grief, to end the grief. And you can't have Shiva for as long as you feel like you need it. It's 7 days and you have to get up and go out. And that the orgy of grief, the expression the orgy of grief, those of us who have, we know what that means. Because we feel sometimes closer to the one who's left than we do to the world. And that it's important for a community to know the etiquette, if you will, of how to drag somebody on the other side back into life. So I think that that's part of what you'll be listening for, Ellen, is how you're going to drag back onto this side of things by the limitation of grief, by acting through the ritual.
My name is Deanne Newman, and I'm here kind of by fluke in a way. Ellen had told me about this. I haven't thought about it at all. I'm not a practicing Jew. I had a Jewish father and a Jewish husband, and so there's quite a bit there. And you know, I'm a Jungian analyst, and certainly death has been my teacher. Death of all kinds, and certainly that's why I do what I do. It's my spiritual practice, really. And I'm really so surprised and happy to be here and feel in alignment with what I've heard everyone saying. And at this place in my own life of I will be 68. Certainly I'm thinking about the end of my life, and I've said goodbye to a lot of people on this plane anyway. And I'm very, unlike Ellen, really who I've known since I was 26. I feel the opposite. I feel really turned on by this subject, really enlivened by it.
I'm gonna learn a lot here, I can tell. This is good. Good, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, what was her name?
Deanne
Deanne.
Newman.
I'm sorry, Malka, I didn't hear what you
So
said.
I'm gonna learn a lot. A lot of you, I knew that if I gathered this group and this subject, I'd learn a lot. I knew this would be good. You know, Leslie, I'm gonna show you my books in a minute, and you're gonna probably look at these books, and if you're like me, you're gonna say, how come these books are, some of these books are really pristine and unmarked? Like, what is she making it up? And I'll tell you why. I'll make my confession. Is I gave Leslie all my books on death and dying for us to study together, which is often which was our process. I'd go up to visit her, and I'd say, kind of go around these books. Do not read chapter 8. I mean, I was very specific about where she shouldn't go. So, of course, that's where she went, of course. Anyway, she died on Sunday morning, or in the early hours of Sunday morning. So sometime around Wednesday, Thursday, I realized, I don't really have all this memorized. I don't know what your illusion might be, but I want to just make my confession now. I need my books, And then Billy very softly, I need my books, Leslie and I never, ever studied from them. I would go up there, and I would always have an alternative, like the holiday that was coming up, or some ethical self-improvement, and we would study that. Finally, I said, let's forgive us. Let's forgive each other, It's like, this is just not a subject that either of us is really into, and we're just not going to study it. We'll study what we want to study. While we live, and that's how it is. And that's how it was with Leslie, because we die as we live, as I'm sure many of you know. So that was Leslie's energy, and she really had the right rabbi for this. Anyway, the books are gone. Leslie took them. I mean, I'm telling you, we went through that. I mean, Leslie overheard me talking to Billy very softly because I didn't want to be, rude about this. Leslie said, Billy, go into the library, go into the library, out of the bookshelf. Just piles of book piles on each side of the bed. They're not there. Anyway, so I right away, got onto Amazon, paid extra, pay a little bit faster, whatever it was. That's why these books are pristine.
You have to walk in with books.
I want to tell you that. That's right. They don't have my books, I don't know anything yet.
I'm Sally Peterson, and I've taken this course at least once or twice with Malka before, and I have a very pragmatic result. My mother was a very, very angry woman all her life, until the moment she died, and right into eternity, she never stopped. And I could not understand this. And my mother's a Gentile, so there was no, what do you do? She would go to church. She wasn't an atheist, but she did not go to church. She did not believe. She was skeptical. And I thought, what do I do? So, per her order, she was cremated, which bothered me terribly. But that's her wishes, and you sort of have to make decisions. So I did, and I got on an airplane, my mother at my side, and the Archbishop of Santa Fe was my seatmate, so which was wonderful, because at least I could talk about what do you do between the two. He didn't have any answers either. But it was still, and I thought, well, my mother would like it, and I said, yeah, Mom, I can do the best I can, it's between the two. And I got off the plane, and my granddaughter met me at home, and ran up to me, and I'd not seen her in over a year, and she ran up to me and she said, I'm so sorry, Zavta. She said, your mother is dead, and my grandmother is dead, and great-grandmother is dead, and my daddy, but I'll share my daddy with you. Being, 4-year-old. So within the next few days, we buried my mother, and I thought a lot about what Malka had said, book she told me to read. And I connected in a very different way. I've lost people before, but not like this. And I thought, well, I think I have to do what I feel because there's no precedent. And what did I pick up from Malka? So I decided that I would dig the grave. So I dug the grave, and there were 6 friends who came, and I said, would each one of you like to do what you feel you need to do at this time? And I would like to go last. And I concocted, based upon, I don't know what, a funeral. And it was very, not only enlightening, but it was a great relief. What I did not get was the experience of Shiva. 3 years later, I lost someone else who was dearer than my heart. And I had Shiva. And that's how I came to Palmacombe, because I had no place to go over the course of a year. And it made all the difference in the world. When Leslie and I were friends for about 2.5 years, and needless to say, a friend is a friend and you can't define it to someone else. But yes, I did and do mourn her loss. But my first reaction was I was so eternally grateful that she would not suffer, because there were some things in her death that were just so horrible for her. And I was so relieved, and it made me feel rather strange that I thought, well, there probably isn't anyone else in a group that would see this, but I was so happy for her. And I told her this before she died. And who knows what a response is. I mean, I told her that I loved her and that it was okay. She could do what she needed to do, and it was okay, and we all loved her, and we were all there. That was all I could do. But this is important for a third reason, in that my grandchildren have another set of grandparents, and their grandfather has Alzheimer's. And they are going to be going through this. And I share the experience of my being a Jew and their being a Christian. And they will not get this from anyone else. So I'm here to try to figure out some way of melding the two, because I so thoroughly believe in the process of people being present, being there in the moment, that this is something that I hope, this is a gift I hope I can give my grandchildren. And they certainly are receptive to it, so that's my hope for this class.
Great. Thank you for taking this again. Once again, I hope I have not forgotten more than I knew then. I have others who remember it.
I always learn more.
And you've heard me use this word before, but really, we have a very good technology. And of all of our technologies surrounding ritual, the one that's remained most intact over millennia are the rites of death. Because I believe they have profound psychological value. They work. They're useful. We have therapists in the room, and I think that there's some of these pieces, and that's part of why I think when some people ask, like Janie and others, like, well, should I really come? I say, yes, because I know that I've learned. I mean, I've read Starhawk's book. Starhawk, for those of you who don't know, is a witch. Starhawk went to Hebrew high school in an earlier life, and when her mother died, and she went through the rites, went through Jewish ritual. She then created the Wiccan Book of the Dead, based on, and she said she saw the value of ritual, and then put some extra spin on it. So I think that there's much that we can all learn about this profound, inchoate truth that we call death, that is mystery without question, and that Ruth Ann shared, and others of us, I'm sure, have had these experiences, I'll share somebody. I've had also, but I think that mostly the benefit of this technology is that it is useful and that I think it has a future.
My name is Claudia Sanchez, and I too am no stranger to death because of my profession. I'm a nurse practitioner, so I have been, and I have also been trained and taken classes from Kubler-Ross as well, because this is the work that I had. I always knew how to comfort other people. But I was a caretaker, and when I faced my own mortality, I didn't know how to comfort myself. And I was so afraid, not of death, but of, because I knew that if I lived, there was a possibility that eventually I would not remember, and I didn't want to go through that. So a friend, an Ashkenazi Jewish friend, who I love dearly, who I've known, who really was, I guess, not really a practicing Jew, I don't know, but because we always shared, since we knew each other since the university. But she would always tease me and call me, she'd always call me the genetic Hebe. And so when I came home after I had surgery, I couldn't see very well. And there was a book from her that she'd sent me a book, and it was called Seeing God. And I laughed, and I said it would be just like Maggie to send me a book like this when I can't see. So I had my companion read the book to me. And I said, this is the journey that I need to continue. And I did. I started to study after I got better on my own. But then one day I said, I need to return home. And I know, and home to me is New Mexico because originally I'm from here. And but I need to return not only to the land, I need to return to a people. And I found a family. And I found a teacher. And I'm not alone now. And I've been afraid, but this family takes me and helps me and says, you don't have to be afraid, Claudia. And if my tears are not from sadness, they're from joy, because I have found a family and found it in Hamakom. And this is my family, and I'm not alone anymore. So every day I face my illness, but every day I know there's someone who thinks of me in this family.
Whatever you've received, you've given manifold.
Hi. Wait a second. I'm going to focus on you. I like being here. I like directing and photographing. I could stay backstage. Anyway, I'm Barbara Baker. I'm relatively new to Santa Fe. Been here 2 years now, and I love studying Judaism and the different philosophies and aspects. And I used to, when I lived in Savannah, Georgia, I was in a lot of study groups, and I've always found this subject really interesting, and it's one that I've been in study groups before. And my parents are turning 80, and this last year and a half, I've started losing really close childhood friends, and Jewish and non-Jewish, and it's just a way to keep my mind stimulated and a contact with Judaism that I love, and especially the philosophical and intellectual part of Judaism. I think it's so fascinating. So I started getting my Hamacom on my internet and started reading it and said, yay, get involved. And this was a good time to start becoming involved. So I'll start my beginning with death. So that's why I'm here.
Everything begins in darkness. In
Yes.
our tradition, our holidays begin at sundown. Baby is in the womb of darkness, so everything begins in darkness. So this is a good place. We're delighted to have a new member of Hamacom with us.
Thank you.
I think that one of the blessings of participating in being with the dying one, sitting with the dead, participating in a washing, going to the house of mourning for the Shiva is, for me, it's very reassuring. It's like, oh, it's not going to be so bad at the end of it. If this is how it ends, and this is, and I think that for many of us in our community, Leslie is our first death. And you never know how things are going to be the first time for anybody, you know, and as a community as well. And to see how much of this community has shown up, you know, we've heard the word being present. You know, the Rebbe Woody Allen, 80% of life is showing up especially in times of darkness is difficult for all of us. But to see that people will do this, I think, and that we will do this for others, gives us assurance too of what will come at the end of time too. Jane.
My name is Janie Oakes, and I am a member of St. Bede's. So this is my church home.
This is your synagogue.
This is my synagogue. I've had many experiences with the dying, and many experiences with birthing. And years ago, when I was a labor and delivery nurse, I was so moved by the moment of birth. Sometimes the doctor, you know, here I would be the RN, you know, looking, you know, doing what I was supposed to be doing, or trying to do what I was supposed to be doing. But usually I would be sobbing, you know, behind my mask, and, you know, I had my gloves on and everything, and the doctor would nearly always say, oh, that Janie Oakes, you know, she must be here again. Because she's always the one who cries when we have a delivery. But I must say that my experiences as a hospice volunteer and with other friends who I've attended in death, it's so similar. My experience in labor and delivery, my experience in being with a laboring, dying person, so familiar. Very intimate, nothing like it. So I'm very moved by those experiences in my life. I'm the oldest member of my family. I'm the oldest person in my family now. So it feels very strange to be at a family gathering and have someone say, you know, Aunt Janie, will you sit at the head of the table? You know, it's like, I'm the one, you know. So that experience of, you know, when the insulation is gone, the insulation of the next generation, the former generation, you feel a little exposed. But that is also a very interesting experience and fascinating to me. And I feel like it's time to be wiser and take on my role as a wiser person. So that's another reason I'm here. I'm also just as a kind of practical, well, I don't know if it's practical, I hope it's a spiritual journey too. As a member of St. Bede's, one of the things I am doing is helping people think about their end-of-life decision-making. And so I'm sitting with people a little here, a little there, talking about these ideas. And we have in the Episcopal Church, you know, kind of a little learning tool for getting to those
conversations. And they're okay, but I need some, I need some good stuff. So I'm counting on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Jane. I think that when when the wind is at your face, and you realize that you are next in line, so to speak, that is, again, one of those sobering moments. And as you say, there were many incidences with Leslie that reminded many of us of birth, that timing her breath, as you time contractions.
May I share, excuse me, Rabbi, just last Saturday, a group of us went up to Leslie's house and we took the Torah, not knowing that within the previous 2 hours or so she had started to enter her sort of coma phase, because she had been aware in the morning. And when we got there, her husband and children were sitting on the bed with her, and I believe another friend. And the hospice nurse was sitting on the hospital bed, Leslie was in her own bed. And we walked in and unfurled the Torah around her bed. And just a handful of us, and then we sort of left the room fairly quickly. We thought she was leaving in those moments, or one of the family members. And the hospice nurse came out, she said, I just felt like I was in a birthing room. It was like the women were around her, and that's what it felt like. It was so beautiful. And then Malka also mentioned at that time, and the timing of the breaths, the space between the breaths versus timing contractions, it really had this sense of birthing. It was really quite amazing. Birthing your death.
My name is Babette Landau, and I'm becoming a member slowly but surely. I will have a hard one to talk. 3 years ago, my husband passed away. He was sick for 18 months, and I never left his side. I'm sorry. So as you were saying, somebody was saying about the intimacy of those moments and the richness that brings in your life. So it has been 3 years, and I feel it's like everybody says it takes 3 years to finally get beyond the grief. And I'm there, and I met Leslie 3 times. First time was in her house for Hanukkah, I think, briefly, and then she was sitting behind me for Rosh Hashanah, and she started sobbing, and I turned and grabbed her hands, and it was as if her pain was mine. It was this I'm sorry. There was this total transfer of her pain. I totally felt it. And the next day I called the hospice, and they say, I want to be a member. And they had a waiting list. They had too many people, so they are going to take me in the next training, which is April. But I know one thing, that the compassion and the depth of compassion that I have, I feel it's endless. I don't want to learn more, to be able to communicate that compassion. I don't know how to express that, but that's really what Leslie and my husband Dave made. That's that's where I want to help. Because it was a very isolating thing when he was sick. It's very lonely. And it's also, I mean, it's not a coincidence that I started coming to your community and hearing that there is a group forming, and I know that's the place for me. And I will just add something, which is I was raised Catholic and converted. On my mother's side, she was Corsican. Death was really part of life. It was very, because it was a village and it was a community very strong for death, much stronger than for weddings, as you were saying. And if somebody was sick, it was a duty to go and visit them and help them, or a duty to, if somebody died, you came or stayed with a person dying and all that. Not that I experienced many of those, but that's the tradition. And when Larry was sick, what was really revealing, that it's the Jewish friend that came and helped. And I don't want to be discriminatory because I was Catholic, but that's when, I felt some friends disappear and some appeared, and the one who appeared happened to be Jewish. I don't know how that happened, but the support I got. So I want to be able to give that, to give some back. That's that. I'm sorry for my emotion.
Thank you, sorry. Appreciate it. Hi, my name is Deanna Todd, and I'm a member of Malka. I'm a student of Malka. And I come here through a very circuitous journey of rejecting Judaism and becoming a Buddhist and a Yogism, and I'm sure I'm not alone in that.
That's the fifth denomination of Judaism.
This one I'm more comfortable with. And I want to acknowledge that I'm here because I value so much what you have to teach me. Malka, that any course, if you gave it on probably anything, the stock market, I would probably.
Judaism and the stock market.
In the Buddhist tradition, death is very important, and so I did take courses with Stephen Levine, and I did become a hospice volunteer. It sounds like we have an abundance of us here. However, in my own life, I was already a practicing Buddhist at that time, but I lost my father when I was about 25, and it's way too young to lose a parent. And I kept on thinking, I have 40 more years with this man, why is he dying? But I did take off from my fast pace as a yuppie living in New York City as a librarian, and I did take off about 3 months, and I moved in with weird living in my childhood home and sat with my father, and it was very boring. A lot of it was very boring. I remember, the TV blaring, and I think it was Watergate happening. It was like, it was very, it was kind of an isolating experience. And I had left a marriage and wanted to bring up this idea of this dying wish. So my father was kind of in that in-between state between life and death, and he felt so, he couldn't let go because he was so worried about me not being able to cope for myself. So one of his dying wishes that I go back to my ex-husband, which I couldn't do. It was like asking, I wish I could have done it, but I couldn't do that. But I did feel good that I spent almost all my time with him, and I did say to him, just like Sally, I felt the extent of his suffering, and I did say, let go, it's all right to let go. But when he did let go was when The whole family was downstairs, and a lot of children making noise. We were eating lasagna dinner. I mean, everything had been so somber and so gray. And I guess some people probably drunk a little bit or something like that, and there was laughter. And then someone went up to say goodbye to him, and they said that he made that transition. But I know it was me, and also my mother, who wasn't a very independent person, kept him from crossing over. I also have 2 children who are adopted, so because of that, they probably were Christian, and they sometimes try to hurt me by saying, I am Christian. They really know how to get at me, so it's not like there's going to be, and I'm the youngest child, so I don't know if there will be anybody to sit Shiva for me or say Kaddish for me. So you asked us to bring up that point. I feel some pain about that. And as Malka knows, I do have some discomfort with growing older. I don't think it's facing death that much as just the loss of my vitality and femininity and all that. So you are such a great example because you seem so ageless and young to me. But every time it's my birthday, it's like I feel kind of bummed out on my birthday because I'm getting closer to the last part of my life rather than it's the beginning.
My name is Michael Murgle. Passed away. That my father didn't have any relatives here, and I feel like I've been through an initiation by understanding what her fears were and what she wanted. And people consider me a Kabbalist here in this community. I've been a passionate student of the Hebrew mystery traditions most of my life. And I like to use the word initiation for the most deepest spiritual walk that we're a part of, that's in the heart of all the religious traditions. And what we've mentioned before, how birth and death have this kind of symmetry. And I've been at one birth besides my own and experienced that same initiation of a fuller understanding of what it is to be a human being. My father died 3 years ago, and there's a few people here that took part in his dying. My father was my mother's primary caregiver. She had a long illness, breast cancer. And I was my father's primary caregiver. Sally was pretty close to that position too. Malka came, Malka was there. And both my parents are buried in a cemetery a few blocks away. Now, after my father died, the next high holy days is when I came to Mahamakom. And actually that's where I first met Leslie. So that was about 2.5 years ago, and she had just finished one of her chemos. Her hair was just coming back. And we had the little minions on Shabbos at Ponce de Leon. And I started talking cosmic stuff. So, amazingly to me, because it always amazing people were started to ask me questions and everything. And Leslie actually is the first person that said, I want you to teach me Kabbalah. So that was part of my motivation for having the class. And Bill and Leslie, I couldn't have done it without Bill and Leslie. And then, a few months ago, Leslie asked me to come and visit with her to tell her where she's going to go, where she's going. And that was an initiation for me, because that was like, I mean, I was honored, you know, that she trusted me and respected me to ask me that. So, and it seems like I'm in a place where more people are asking me more questions. And I've come here, I've always felt that in the deepest mysteries of Kabbalah, it's who the angels of death are and what they really mean. And I feel that for a person, you can't really teach Kabbalah. Kabbalah means to receive. And you can't teach Kabbalah. How can you teach somebody something that means to receive? But for people in the place of receiving, to understand who the angels of death are, I mean, for somebody to tell you they know, you know, and I'm going to tell you, that's the deepest area of understanding of what that means. It's, I mean, the meaning of what life is about is what I mean. I mean, the mystery of the creation is involved with what death is about and who the angels of death are. And what my questions, and yes, I do have questions, I mean, all through the oral Torah and the teachings, you will find the phrases, and death will be conquered. Particularly one of the angels of death. Now, you know, in different traditions, well, people would say, oh, what do you mean? I mean, even in our own tradition at the High Holy Days, we read, well, we have to have death. What if we didn't have death, then we wouldn't have birth. You know, we wouldn't experience, you know, the new cycle of children coming in. So, what does it mean? For me, the question is, what does it mean that death will be conquered? And is it something that we might expect, or is it something that we may not really expect? That it might involve understanding this birth and death cycle. So I have a lot of questions.
My name is Michael Gold, and I'm here because death is a road we all travel, yet we seldom speak about except in times of extreme crisis. But we did learn it in Hebrew school, and we don't talk about it in our day-to-day lives, but it is there. And it's all such a mystery. But there's always tomorrow, so they don't get tracked. So I feel what better way to learn and to teach than to be in a group of other people who are exploring the same questions. As an aside and in closing, I will make the observation for the Kabbalists and for the non-Kabbalists among us that there are 18 of us here today. 18 is, for those who don't know, is number of pi of life. So this is a good beginning.
Thank you for pointing
Good
My name is Judith Freilich, and I don't live in Santa Fe. I live in Maine, but I've been coming to Santa Fe fairly often since April, when I came for a Being with Dying course at Upaya, and came to this community after meeting Malka during the women's retreat there. Came to this community for high holiday services. Thankful because I was here at that time helping out at the Zen Center. And was here last Saturday getting ready to go into a week-long sitting, which I just finished. And had learned at that point on Sunday morning about Leslie's death. And was glad that I had met her when I was here in the fall, and surprised at the depth of my reaction and knowing what this community was feeling. And I carried that with me during this week of silence. born Jewish. I wasn't raised particularly within Judaism. In fact, my family didn't really participate in any of the rituals, and I didn't know much. I married a man who was Jewish, and he didn't want to know much. And so my Jewish education was kind of a private thing and not done very well, at least my Jewish experience, until 1993 actually. I came to Arizona and was teaching with the Dalai Lama, during which time I met somebody who was a cantor for I was living in Arizona at the time. He was a cantor for a Jewish renewal congregation. And then my Judaism became much more real to me. So I learned some. I just received a Jewish name. I visited with Rabbi Zalman Schechter Shlomi in May in Boulder, and he suggested the name to me, and so it was given to me by Grafstein and Leah Novik at Simchas Torah, where because it was a congregation that was important to me, so I went there in this past fall. So it's a new thing for me. My personal journey is that my parents died when I was younger. They died suddenly, so I did not have any time to prepare, although when I think about it, there were preparations even though I didn't know them. And we did things that were traditional, I believe. I don't even remember, actually. I think we sat a conventional shiva both for mom and for dad. All I remember is the people around. And then my children died. And boy, did I have to start learning. Their father, who was no longer my husband, had been raised in a family that was more traditional. And I sat there and said, I think they need to be cremated. And they sat there and said, no way, not Judaism, no cremation. So they're buried in a Jewish cemetery outside of Philadelphia. And I just met with my former husband. 20 years he has not been willing to talk with me about the girls. We just met for the first time in November. And he said, you know, you were right about cremation. That's what we should have done. It's interesting. So now I'm faced with my own thoughts about that. For me, I did not even know the first thing about death from a Jewish tradition, from a Jewish perspective. And I only found out talking to somebody else I hadn't seen in 20 years in November that he knew that I didn't. So he did Kaddish for my daughters for a year, even though I didn't know who was doing it. But over the years, I've learned many things. I've learned some things about the afterlife because I've met my children. We've talked and we've spent time together. And it wasn't until after that began that I found out that there is that element within Judaism. And so I'd like to know more about it. I've studied some of it. I know more about death and dying from a Buddhist perspective than I do from a Jewish perspective, and I'd like to find some balance for that. This was started right after the session was over, so I guess I can go. And express my sorrow for the loss that we all had.
My heart's very full just listening to everybody, and I'm prone to tears when I'm touched, so I feel very connected to what you were saying. I'm Judy Herzl, and I feel rather familiar with death also. My parents were both Holocaust survivors, and so was my entire extended family. So it was like this cloud of all the people who hadn't made it. And perhaps as a result of that, both my parents died relatively young. I think the trauma of what they lived through really took a big toll. So I lost my father when I was 27, and almost died myself a couple days later, or maybe I think it was the day after. I was driving from Boston to Newark to be with my mother, and my boyfriend was driving because I didn't trust myself to drive, and we had a really bizarre accident that I don't even know what happened. He claims that the steering box on the car broke, but I'll never know. So it's a funny thing, a thing running through my life is that my personal experiences with death have all been through car accidents, and I also had a rather intense one here in Santa Fe, a head-on collision in 1990, and at that moment, I was surprised because I've been a practicing Buddhist for a long time too, and it was a very healing thing to come to from my background and know about compassion, in that way. I mean, that was the connection, and I think that was the purpose of what I took from what my parents lived through, was to understand suffering. But when this car was coming at me, rather surprising, I just went, okay, God, if you want me now. And so it was interesting that that was still so richly there, and because my grandfather was a rabbi in Poland, and that's part of my tradition, but because of what my parents went through, they themselves were not very practicing, but my relatives were. So I sort of had both sides of it. And one of the reasons I wanted to come was because I was remembering my two great uncles. I had two great uncles that were very vivid in my life, and we went to Seder at one house one day and then Seder the next house the next night. And they would always have these stories, and I don't know if they're from the Talmud or if they're just this sort of Jewish folkloric stories, but the stories seem to answer everything. And I don't have that in me for my son. But I pulled a couple that I've gotten from rather bizarre sources, like not even Jewish sources, but these sort of, I don't know, Joseph Campbell kind of sources. And when I share them with my son, they are just the most perfect thing. So part of why I came was because I'm really hungry for that. And you can give me a reading list too. You don't have to have them all. But a really big, really significant part of my life was that I moved my mother from New York City here for the last 14 months of her life. And I didn't know that when I moved her it was going to be that soon. And really participated very, very fully in that time. And at the time, I was drawing more on my Buddhist background as a way of coping with it. But it's interesting because even though I didn't sit Shiva, I had, I don't remember for how many days, but I had like 2 practice sessions, twice a day. I made a mandala with her pictures and things, and strangely enough, there's one Buddhist tradition where you make a shrine of the foods that were the most comforting to that person. And someone said, I've never seen a Buddhist shrine with gefilte fish on it. But it was funny how a lot of things, I think, just make sense to do, and so there was this period of time after her death, and even though I knew nothing of the washing, and I still don't, I did do a washing of her body with saffron water and so on. She wanted to be cremated, and so did my dad, and both of them were. And it's interesting because even one of these great uncles, who was a very practicing Jew, wanted to be cremated. And I often wonder if it has to do with the camps and what happened to their friends and their family. But my mother was cremated, and for me, as a Buddhist, it made total sense, but for one of my relatives who was a very Hasidic Jew, he couldn't come. And actually, Usher Katz, who was helping my mom, and he was actually just really wonderful in working with her. And I really wanted him to do the ceremony for her because he knew her. And he thought about it and just couldn't do it. So that was the first for me to understand that there was like a demarcation zone about this issue. And it's not, I don't know, it's not a really big deal for me here in terms of what choice I would make for myself. But I feel that since I know so much about the Buddhist tradition, it only makes sense that I should also know, about the tradition of my lineage. And I think having a child really made me realize how there was just all the stuff I wanted to pass on, and that I really was a Jew, even if I had rebelled against parts of it. And lastly, I guess I just want to say that I think the thing that's been really hard for me about being Jewish, well, there's a couple things. One is that as a 5 or 6 year old, I went with my grandmother to her temple. It was at her shul. It wasn't her temple. It was shul for sure. And it was like being in a Marc Chagall painting. And there were all these older Eastern European Jews, and I just could feel it. It was just this feeling. It was so spiritual. And I've never felt anything like that. Again, I sort of got ruined, and I've been looking for that. And I think that's why I went to Buddhism along with the suffering and compassion, because it felt like it was a little closer, to that experience. But also I think because of this whole Holocaust past, being Jewish has such a painful piece to it. And it's funny because my son loves being Jewish. And in fact, when I go to do a Hanukkah thing, all of a sudden everyone in his class is also Jewish, like the whole class. It's a really popular thing. And I'm kind of, things are starting to creep up a little bit, like books, or, he has a book on World War II, and I was like, yeah, I know a lot about that war. I don't want his joy at being Jewish to be tarnished the way mine was. I mean, mine really was. I used to love it when people thought I looked French or Italian and not Jewish. It just was like something I was trying to separate from. So I think that's also why I'm here.
Well, I think that, again, what I said earlier about the rites of death in Judaism are also intended to put limitation to the suffering. And there's a time for joy as well. And I think the shadow of the Holocaust in families that have been touched by Holocaust so personally, I think that's been a very hard place to put that container, for sure. But that's your job, Judy, to bring that to them. Thank you all. Breathe. I'm going to invite everybody to get up and do a little spazier, a little stretch. I'm going to put out some books here that I have found useful. I also have some things that I'm going to give as handouts to take with you. The question is why? So there really actually is some idea. There is, Michael can give you the facts on it. I'll just give you the overview. But the facts on it are that there is this idea of a ruach within the Jew. It's very powerful. A spirit. Ruach means wind, breath, and spirit. It's very nice because it sort of ties the physical and the metaphysical in the same word. So I think that first of all, that as a people, it's not a DNA issue. It really isn't. And what makes us Jews is something much more profound than that. I mean, first of all, read the book. Moses' wife wasn't Jewish. Isaac's wife wasn't Jewish. I mean, like what? I mean, it's like on and on and on and on. It's like Martin Buber, right? That it's not so much about that this is an issue that you can go back through your DNA, despite what they tell you when you discover that you've been a Kohen. Well, fine. That's not really the issue. The issue really is this is a people, back to our subject, intoxicated with life. Literally intoxicated with the gift that's been given us. Painful as it is. Confusing as it is. Disappointing, frustrating, yada yada. Yeah, it's, I keep saying that we're not Orthodox Jews, but paradox Jews. We live with the dialectic between this amazing gift and that it's true, as difficult it is for some of us to step into that dark night with the one who is leaving and having to leave behind the great gift, that it all the more so for us to remember that without death, that we would have no meaning for our lives whatsoever. I've written a sheet over there called The Total of Death, which actually Diane Stromberg, our webmeister, reminded me I had written. I was so glad to read it. It was so helpful to me because I really don't remember anything. It's just great. But in there, I quote Sherwin Newland, which I forgot to bring, but I will bring Tuesday night. There are two other books in addition to that library over there. One is How We Die. If you haven't read that, it's an amazing book. He says it very simply. We die so that others may live. It's just the principle of life. That being said, on one side, the other side is, for some of us, this is like a wonderful dinner party. And who wants to leave a good party? A good friend of mine, Sylvia Borstein, some of you may know Sylvia, is a practicing Jew and a practicing Buddhist. Sylvia went to Zalman Schachter and said to Zalman, I really am not looking forward to my death, so. And he said, well, if you don't get this together, you're just going to have to come back again. And she thought about it and said, okay. And Thursday night, we'll talk more about this, but in fact, there is an idea that, look, those of you who are therapists, isn't basically the underlying principle of everything, we do it until we get it right? Isn't that life? Yeah. Okay, so why wouldn't that exist, not only within a lifetime, but through lifetimes? We just keep coming back until we get it right. Each of us learn what we have to learn. And in the meantime, our perspective in this class is going to be dual. It's imagining our own deaths and knowing our relationship to the one who's dying. And holding with all of this, a major spiritual principle. In the last words we say before we die, the same words we say when we wake up in the morning, the same words we say when we go to sleep at night, the Shema, which goes, Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Now, golden mean. Syllabically, we know that it follows a literary form, Michael, right? A haiku. The Shema is a haiku. For those of you who know that. Those of you who are into Eastern traditions, you should know that actual Judaism is probably more Eastern than Western.
It's more shamanic than anybody knows.
And, well, that's a whole other story. The other aspect of it is the last word. Echad is a very profound word. It means one. One. And it really does bring us, at the end of life, into a connection, the undying connection, if you will. And and you ask why Jews turn to Buddhism, I think that first of all, for many of us, the experience of being in synagogues, I think it was Heschel who said that the American synagogue is suffering from a terrible cold.
Perfume too.
Perfume, see, this is like a major mess. Fancy day, that's right. No scent, that's right. You know, and beyond that, I also, when I first read that, thought that it's also about breath. I mean, you can't breathe when you have a cold. Right. And that there was a lack of spirit. Right. And it was hard to be inspired, that is, to receive Kabbalah again, receive the Spirit. Why? Judy talked about some of it. The trauma of the Holocaust cannot be underestimated. Every rabbi who wants to talk about the celebration of the Jews in light of the Holocaust on Yom HaShoah, I have always said, needs a little more therapy. I mean, yes, we survived, yet we also died. Part of it, the fear within our people, the depression within our people, the garrulousness within our people is not our essence any more than it's any human being's essence to be aggressive, depressed, and afraid. That's what we become when we've been traumatized. So I think that part of what happened is that for many Jews, what they saw in the synagogues was really the result of trauma. It's like meeting a person who's like horrible to be in the presence of. Total negative energy. You don't know what it's about. And then you find out afterwards, some horrible tragedy has befallen this person. So that's sort of how I see it. Do you know how many Jews that I've met who are like mega spiritual leaders in other paths, like Starhawk, yada yada, Marianne Williamson, who have said to me, Ram Dass, you just name them, you know, it's like, we are very spiritual people. Never underestimate our spirit. Sharon, so oh my God, all those guys, and Kornfeld and all those guys, yeah. You know, and they all say, oh boy, we've only met, you know, rabbis, you know, like Zalman, you know, whatever, you know, they only had met this other energy, this energy that really, well, you know, I can say to you, I don't have Jews experience. I didn't know about Holocaust till I was 10 years old, and I came home with it, mentioned it to my parents. This was 1955, and they looked at me as if I was talking about oral sex. I knew that was never a subject to be discussed again, because they didn't want me to be afraid, like you don't want Theo to be afraid. The fact is, you know, it is part of our history, and it's a question of how to teach it. That's why I wrote a book about rescuers, because I felt the only way that Jews could come to a place of healing and forgiveness was to know that it wasn't all darkness and horror. There was some redemptive light. So I use what I use. I use my innocence. I use my being able to remain untraumatized, Judy. On the other hand, it wasn't until I've confronted deaths, as most recently as a week ago, that I have been forced to really face what must be faced. And I accept it because I know that it'll make me a better person. I may not like it. A lot of things we don't like doing, yet we know in the end it's what makes us better people. So I first of all want to thank everyone for taking the time to be here for this, and knowing that this is a little bit of work that they can do that's going to make them better. And if you make yourself better, it's double mitzvah, because what happens when you become a better person? The world becomes better. The better we work ourselves, the better we make our contribution. And one of the mitzvahs, obviously, that we can perform is the mitzvah of what we do before a person dies. That there's actually a name for this one. This is the dying one is called a goses, or a gosesset. It's a person who, and what can we do for the goses?
Could you spell that phonetically for the Hebrew challenge?
Goses would be your translation. And the Hebrew would be Gimel, Vav, Samech. Pretty sure it's Samech. Double check that. I think it's Samech.
It sounds more like a summer.
No, I think it's Shin Shin, or Sin Sin, yeah, Sin Sin. Go sis.
Goses is the dying
The dying person. The dying person is regarded as, again, like a neonate. It's a special state. The dying one is still a full citizen of the world. If you need that one for a minyan to make 10 to pray, a goses counts. They can serve as a witness. A goses is a full member of society. God forbid you discuss anything concerning their death when they're in this state. There are certain things that I never discussed with Leslie. The ethical will, that we'll talk about in a couple of minutes. We never talked about an ethical will. Why? Because when Leslie and I really started to learn together, she'd already had her diagnosis. The time to write your ethical will is this afternoon. Ruth Ann will talk to us about that. You can be awakened by some physical weakness within yourself, the vulnerability. But that's one thing. But to have stage 4.5 cancer, all your energy, especially if you're a Leslie in this world, all your energy is going to go towards life. And you're not going to look at your ethical will. So, and we never discussed anything she didn't want to discuss. I told you, I wrote the dying books there. We talked about Rosh Hashanah. So, you know, that's it. The one thing she did discuss was what she wanted for the rituals concerning her life after. What would happen with her afterlife. And we'll discuss those in a bit, but that was our conversation. What is it like to sit, what's the etiquette, if you will, of being with, the first thing is to be with the goses. The goses is never to be left alone. If a person is in a state of dying, conscious or unconscious, you stay with them. Why? Because some of you have even said this, that you've come to a place of sufficient enlightenment where you do not fear death. But I don't know anyone who doesn't fear being abandoned and forgotten. I mean, one of the things we'll talk about in afterlife is the reason there's a day of judgment. Every Jew says, whether they know it or not, unless they're davening across town in a Reformed congregation, they're going to say Mechayeh HaMeitim, which means who revives the dead. Reformed prayer book reads, who revives all. Big difference. Why? Because it's embarrassing to think about physical resurrection. I was once teaching over at Beth Shalom, and Ruth Kovnat said, well, if there's such a thing as physical resurrection, can I have my 18-year-old body when I reappear? And so there is a sort of an idea like, what can it possibly mean to return? But the point of returning is that there will be a day of judgment when every being will appear. I'll explain this more fully on Thursday. And some will be judged so that they will be forgotten as if they had never lived. A Hitler, Nebuchadnezzar, Saddam Hussein, Nehru. Those as if they had never lived. That's the ultimate punishment. So really for us, the idea of dying is you could take many different theologies, and we'll talk about this. Anything I'm going to say in here regarding afterlife, I'm going to tell you is myth. Not meaning falsehood. Meaning is just something that can't be proved. Good. Some of my best friends are atheists. You'd be surprised. It's like, and of course they're very absolutely certain. I think, well, why don't you accept that what you have is myth? There is no God? How do you know? There is God? Who knows? So I say, whatever works what's best for you in your life. Whatever is going to really help you to live the most fully and the most whole. Find that myth, however that's going to work. So, when I talk about the notion of physical resurrection, I'm speaking to you with, this is a myth of a people that has sustained them. There's been disagreement within it. Some of us might say, as John Lennon, what it really is getting out of one car and into another. It depends on whatever works for you as metaphor is fine. But in this state, though, of being a ghosis, and some of you who've had a hospice experience have spent a lot of time with the dead, with the dying, know there's great variation with how people will be in this state. It has nothing to do with age. Some people will be in a place of tremendous resistance to what's happening. What do we do? The first thing we do is Bikur Cholim. We stay by the side of this one. Yeah.
How does that fly in the face of some people can't die with a loved one or someone in the room? So often, it's the time, that's what you were saying, I'm sorry, I don't remember your first name. Diana. It's so common what Diana experienced, so how do you put that together?
Well, I would say many things happen in this life, and our preference would be to, first of all, that if we know someone is dying, whether we know them or not, we make sure that that person has somebody near them. That's one role we can play in this life, Carol. Secondly, you have an ethical will you're writing. Make it one of your stipulations. Hey guys, come in, play rock and roll, do whatever you want. But I want you in that room. I don't want to worry for a split second when I slip into that final stage of life that my sister died alone. I'm haunted by it.
Because hospice asked, in the very last moments when my mother was dying, the last hour,
Right.
The woman said, it's really hard for someone to die with their children near them because the bond is so intense. I'm going to stay with her, but would you please go in the other room? And I wasn't far.
Right.
And it haunted me too, until finally someone said, she would have waited. If she wanted you there, she would have waited.
Well, that's a very good point, Judy. So here are some things. Again, this is all things for us to think about. If we have parents who still live, or for ourselves, if we have children, on which side of this we want to look at this. But in this visit, this is when you visit. First of all, this is not just being a nice person. We have obligation, we have commandment to make the world a better place by our behavior. So it is a mitzvah to comfort the bereaved. It is a mitzvah to be beside the dying. That when we are in this place, also though, like everything, the best mitzvahs are the ones where you get a payoff here as well as somewhere else. You want the double bonus. And we also understand that the Shekhinah, indwelling representation of divine energy, is most powerful in that realm. And those of us who were with Leslie know that was true. That presence, the Shekhinah is at the head of the bed. It's at the head. Some will say, don't sit on the bed, because this is sacred space. In Leslie's case,
there were 10
everybody in
people
bed
on her bed.
at any given moment.
At the head.
Any given.
I've heard just not to be at the head of the bed, because that's reserved.
Right, it depends, It's which synagogue you belong to, how much of the bed is important. But the first
To have a big bed.
a very big bed, that's exactly. But it also, again, there are many, on the blog that I wrote about Leslie, you go to my website, you hit blog, you'll see it. There are many things I wrote, and I write it with a caveat, that Leslie, all of you who received her letters, her health updates, know that Leslie really wanted people with her every inch of the way. That's something else you can have in your ethical will. I want presence. I only want the presence of some people. I want to have somebody who knows who I really can't stand. I don't want them in the room, you know. I had a friend who was dying in her 40s. She was the nicest person. She was the guiltiest person by her own admission. And she was a total wimp about people who were just horrific, you know, in her space. The last 2 days of her life, she decided to go off dialysis. And poor Barbara just stepped up to the bat. And I said, Ruth so-and-so. I said, forget about it. I said, great. You know, it's like, great. So that there are these are things for us to think about. But the first thing is, if we go to sit with the go-says, sit. What's the first thing? Listen. Really listen to what they want to talk about. Many of us don't want to talk about our upcoming event. We really don't want to go there. But sometimes people do. And if they do, talk about it with them. But listen carefully for what their concern is. And your work in that moment is to set them at ease. Leslie will probably be our chief example for me. I hope you'll forgive me for this one example, bringing yours. She would bring again and again, she would say, what has my life been? You know, I mean, look, you know, you're a writer. I said, yeah, you know, at the end of the day, when it's all finished, what's going to matter? What they're going to say at your funeral. No one is going to say, visit her website to see what she wrote. I guarantee you. I mean, it's at the end of the day, it's what people said at Leslie's funeral about how many women said she was a friend to my daughter at a time when she needed a friend. And how many children were touched by her life. And by members of Hamakom who know that we are a community because of her. And you said, Leslie, give it a rest. What? So I finally turned it around to her. I mean, I listened long enough, and I said to her, okay, what would you wish you had done? What would make a difference now? This really stopped her. That was good. You have sons who reflect your passions of environment and social activism, being part of the community. You have hundreds. Your lives are different because of the communities you've created and what you've done for them one by one, you know, in this town. Okay, what more? But listen to hear what the concern is. And answer it, and answer it. Because in Leslie's case, it was very difficult to be with her in the last days. Because this was not a person who was at peace. This was Dylan Thomas. You know, do not go gently into that night. Do not, Leslie didn't go gently. Leslie was going to live until that last breath, accept what must be accepted, because she wasn't crazy, but never give up hope. So when you're in the presence of someone like that, this is who she was. You accept who she is in this space, and you follow her. You just go there with her. And the other thing that I always do is that before I always go in, how do you say, you know, whatever your private prayer is, you know? Give me the stuff. Get me out of the way. Really carry faith that you're going to enter into this room where this unusual energy is, and that something will be born in you in this moment. I have learned that hearing is the last sense to go. So even when it seems as if one is not present, continue to speak, read maybe songs, sing. I think many of you know, but some of you don't know, that what happened with Leslie Saturday night, hours before she died. She'd been in a coma for several hours, maybe 7 hours, 8 hours. Breathing, again, like not breathing for a minute or longer, and then gasping and gasping. And I wouldn't say that when people ask, is she at peace, that I was seeing somebody who was at peace with these you know, it's like her body's ready to let go, but her spirit is like, not yet, Jesus. So we're there. She had done Havdalah, which is the ceremony separating the Sabbath from the rest of the week. She had begun doing it months before to separate her faith from her mother's. Her mother had died 10 years before of ovarian cancer. So I knew that practically, you know, the rabbi said, means that she has the Havdalah candle, you know, and we had everything we needed. And then it took a while, you know, she would do it in a room with her, would it be disturbing, and ultimately we go in there at about 7:30. The room is dark. Aaron, Leslie's son, held a flashlight for Cindy so she could lead the ceremony, the ritual of separation, Havdalah means separation. And I also thought that perhaps Leslie might need a little help in separating at this moment. So this service takes about 10 minutes, and Cindy sang, and the community sang. About half of us were Jewish, the rest were not. The last words, ironically, were Shavua Tov, which means
Have a good week.
And I didn't actually sing them, you know, because I sort of held back on it, but it's sort of, you sort of flow from one song into another, and one song is asking for the presence of the energy of the Messiah. I had told Leslie 2 days before, she said to me, do you think we're going to see each other on the other side? Really? And I said, yeah, I do. And Leslie, when we get back together again, we are really going to get this world working. We didn't have enough time in Hong Kong. And we're going to really the first thing we're going to do is make sure that Mashiach, the Messiah, gets down here quick.
Malka,
Yes.
I don't know if this is the appropriate time, but in light of our having done the Havdalah service at Leslie's bedside last week, and when we were there and you first mentioned it, I was a little hesitant. And what that brought up was this fine line between granting her immediate family their alone time with her versus the rest of us being there, and sort of walking that and trying to read it. And it's and I realize it's an important issue to look at. If it's not your immediate parent or child or sister or brother, but someone with whom you're connected, kind of how to maneuver. It turned out to be totally perfect, and the whole family was so in favor of it, and it moved everyone there. But who would have known? I mean, you knew it was the right thing to do, and you hung in there and waited, you know, till it was perfect. But it just brings up that other issue of you know, just using your intuition, or you know.
Well, I think you need to ask. I mean, I think one thing is you need to ask. I mean, in this case, Judy describes hospice inviting her out of the room because of this feeling of this. I think that one of the other steps is also assuring this person that it's all right for them to go.
Right.
And I think for children and for spouses, for all mourners, that to be able to say, let's go. I have a close friend, a wonderful husband. They used to dive together. They were scuba divers. And he had leukemia for 9-10 years. And intrepid. I mean, they always had travel insurance, and they canceled many times. They went diving. He was medevaced 100 times. Whatever was okay. But now it was clearly, you know, the last time, and he was in New York, and he was at Lenox Hill. And Annie said to Marty that night, it was just the two of them. And I've often seen this with the dying. They pick their moment also to go. And she said, let's go on a dive, Marty. She's a writer, and she just took him on a dive, and he passed. I spoke to another rabbi who said that he was saying the Shema, and the Shema is supposed to be the last words on your lips. If you know that, and you've been raised with that, it's a powerful suggestion. And in fact, that was his last breath. But that's not going to work everywhere. So part of it is you have to also know what's appropriate. And in this case, after we sang Shavua Tov, Leslie sat up after being comatose for all these hours. And her eyes were open. This is very disconcerting for, somebody who's only been a rabbi about 7 or 8 years, has only been at 7 funerals. And I was like, I'd never read about this, I'd never seen this, I'd never heard of this or anything else. Nobody in the room. And then Leslie called out, Michael. And there was a man named Michael, a friend in the room. And he sat next to her, but it was as if she was sleepwalking. I didn't understand any of this. And then she lay down again, and then sat up again. And then went back to sleep. But this time the breathing was different. This time the breathing was easier. This time, and the face was different. The face was easier. When I came out of there, Gay said to me, "Why did you do that?"
Why did you do what?
Why did you bring her out of this?
Oh.
God, take my gift, I said, I think that, Leslie's desire to live is so strong that I still had some sense when I saw her in this comatose state when we went up there Saturday afternoon, that she still was not fully resolved. She was not quite, and that somehow that final ceremony for her, that she participated in, and that Michael is one of the angels that we would invoke. Michael at my right hand. So after that, I think that was one of the stages. So I think that this was again, a very profound form of Bikor Cholim that the community offered her. The other piece of it is that it was a ceremony of separation.
Right.
So we were also perhaps saying, it's all right. It's all right. For us, not for her, but our side of the street says, whenever you're ready, as long as you need, we're here. There's no hurry. With the Goses, we're forbidden to hasten the death. For example, by removing a pillow. But if there is, the example is, if there's an impediment, the Talmud's written 2,000 years ago, an impediment. What's an impediment? A wood chopper is outside your door. And the noise, somebody was talking about the noise of the children. If the noise is keeping someone from taking their passage, or perhaps the presence of someone who really isn't ready for them to go yet, then the impediment has to be removed. Quiet the wood chopper. So some people see that as a respirator today. There are ways of translating this. So the Goses is a very, again, you are entering into a very sacred place with this one. And that it's not just sitting there. And that's one of the reasons why I wouldn't be happy just having a nice presence, a pleasant presence, but a professional presence. That you may, so that's another reason, but still, that person knows they're not alone. There's somebody there.
Malka.
Yes.
I'm remembering the moments, the week that my father died, and here I was, a practicing Buddhist and meditating at his side, but I was also an impediment to him letting go because I was the youngest and not at a place that he could accept. However, my brother, who you know is 10 years older and was established, and my father felt good about that. And when he was alone in the room with my father said, Clive, I'm going to the other side. What I would have given for him to say those words to me, because I was just like receptive to it, but I wasn't the person he chose. He did say something like, "You're beautiful," or something like that, as a way of closure. Didn't have too many words, but he did choose Clive, an unlikely, not very spiritual person, to say that to.
Well, I think that again, life is imperfect now, and it would be wonderful if a completely unloving person in the last minutes or hours of life suddenly got it. But I put money on the other side. I'm not speaking of your father, but I'm just saying that the bias, you know, of family, of who to rely upon and family scripts, this will continue, you know. I mean, as we hold their hand, we may know that we were not the child whose hand they really want to be holding right then and there. But that doesn't matter, because God has put us here in this moment to be here with them, and we give them our best shot, regardless of where they're at. I mean, this one still has those limitations, although this one is entering into this sacred space in this journey, in this transitioning. We're not going to get to ethical wills today. We're going to do that Wednesday. But I do want to close with the Dewey. Are any of you familiar with the Dewey? Okay, so Ruthann, would you like to say something about that before do you have any personal experience with it?
What is it?
This word is
Vidui, the traditional one that most of us are familiar with is every Yom Kippur. There's a Yom Kippur Vidui, but there's also a Vidui that the dying person says, or if they are unable to, you recite for them. And there's a whole range of options now. There's some incredibly poetic ones, but the parts that I'm most connected to are first to acknowledge the presence of God and to ask for healing. It's not giving up necessarily, but ask for healing, and if it's the judgment of God that there not be healing of body, that there be healing of spirit, and that whatever suffering I have experienced during my lifetime, may it serve me in my days of judgment. And I mean, there are a lot of different other...
That's a very traditional version, and I'm glad you mentioned that. Leslie had a copy of the Confession, which is what Vidui means. Yes, it's spelled in English, V-I-D-D-U-I. In Hebrew, it's Vav, Yud, Daled, Vav, Yud. So the Vidui, there's one to be recited by the individual, and if one can't say it, then you ask somebody else in the room to say it as well. And there are many versions. In Anita Diamond's book, she has 3 contemporary versions. I'm going to read you the Vidui of the conservative instruction manual for conservative rabbis.
Malka, wait before you start.
Sure.
Thank you.
That's fine. So again, you know, why things are the way they are is often those who suffer from depression and sadness, who often lighten the heart most for others. Churchill said the reason that he could lead the Allies into a place of so much courage is that he had faced what he called the black dog every day of his life. And that he said, you know, really, that was his practice. Every day of his life, he knew how to remove that black dog so he could do it, you know, for nations.
Yeah, he said 2 things that I have on my refrigerator. One is never, never, never give up. And the other is if you're going through hell, keep going.
Keep going.
That's good. That's good. So who else would know that except one who'd actually walk through this fire? That's true. So the Vidui for the individual is, my God, God of my ancestors, accept my prayer. Do not turn away. Forgive me for all the times I may have disappointed you. I am aware of the wrongs I have committed. May my pain and suffering serve as atonement. Forgive my shortcomings, for against you have I sinned. May it be your will, Adonai, my God and God of my ancestors, that I live now with a clear conscience and in accordance with your will. Send a refuah shlema, a complete healing to me and to all who suffer. So there are several things in this. First of all, I hear Leslie in this. Because, Michael, sit here. It's not the rest. That And first of all, I think for some of us, especially firstborn, we had an Aliyah on Shabbos for firstborn children. Firstborn children, you know, the gift carries the curse. Firstborn, often like, you know, the highest achievers and the ones who are like, you know, most obsessed with, you know, their accomplishment and feeling that they've fallen short of the mark or whatever. In Jewish families, all children might have this blessing of feeling that they've fallen short of the mark their whole lives. So now it's the end of the day, and you're really feeling like Leslie was saying to me, what have I done? What is my life? So you can hear it in this joy. You know, maybe I've disappointed you. So please accept my wishing that I could have done more. Who of us, at the end of the day, is going to be able to say, I did fine.
I did it all.
I did it all. So first of all, as Ruth Ann said, every year we have opportunity for this self-examination. I wouldn't wait until the day before you're going to die to do it. It would be really like a terrible way to spend your last day. But if even better than once a year, I have a suggestion. How bad, as my father would say, take the inventory at the end of the day before you go to bed. You know, in the morning you can get up with a very simple prayer. You can get up with traditional prayer, I thank you, God, for restoring the soul within me with compassion and abundant faith. So there are mornings when I wake up and I think, well, boy, God has a whole lot more faith than I do today. But if God has abundant faith that there's been a reason to give me breath and take up space, something may be happening. If that's too much for you to say, like, I thank you, because there are days when probably the first word out of your mouth would not be thank you, then I would say, just get up and say, whatever.
And Modeh can mean acknowledging and surrendering to
Good.
God.
That could be that too. That's good too. Like, there are days you can say thank you, there are days you can say I acknowledge you, there are days you can say I praise you. It kind of depends upon. And if you can't do any of those, just try whatever.
Whatever is a powerful prayer. We've done that in the sweat lodge. It's a very powerful
Whatever is,
prayer.
that's right. It's a good. Thank you. And then what's the coda to it? What do you say when you go to, before you go to sleep at night?
No, this is just a prayer
Right.
that we closed around.
Right.
Well, there's Shema, there's the
Shema.
bedtime Shema.
Shema is great
I
too.
do.
Definitely, no question. All of that's
That
great.
includes the vidui. The bedtime Shema has the vidui.
That's right. It says, I hereby forgive anyone who has hurt me, or in this lifetime, or in any lifetime.
But I know what you're leading to. I'm pretty sure I remember.
You think you remember?
Oh, well.
Got it.
So you wake up and say whatever, and at the end of the day you say, oh well.
That's right. That's right. If you can't remember anything else, whatever, and oh well. Try that. Try that as just for your life.
Lighten up.
Yeah. Just, you know, because really every day is a microcosm of one's life.
Exactly.
So, you know, at the end of the day, you say to God, well, look, you know, first of all, if you're gonna like go along with me in this, you know, somewhere around 55, I decided it was really time to start really expanding my myth, you know, like why not believe in all this other stuff, you know? So here we have them doing, we've said these last words, we're asking God for a life. Many people say, Leslie said they would do it for a month before she died. She didn't know when it was gonna come. She was still praying for healing.
And Alan Levetsky died in his sleep. He had no idea he wasn't going to wake up the next day. He was perfectly healthy.
That's right. That's exactly right. Which is one of the reasons why we might say we do every night before we go to bed. This is like if you're in a situation where you have a sense it may be coming. Thank you, Ellen, for closing the lines. Then we say, after we've said, you know, I want a complete healing, a refuah shlema, my life and death are in your hands, Adonai, my God. You know, may it be your will to heal me. Not cure me. Heal me. Guardian of the bereaved. Protect my beloved family. Our souls are bound together. If you see Billy now, you'll see what someone looks like, again, in another one of these states outside life. As Leslie was a little outside life and we saw her in the last days, Billy is not quite with us. In your hands lies my spirit. And then he said the Shema. And then we say, Adonai is God, Adonai is God. Meaning that all is bound up in this moment. Now, if you cannot say it, then somebody else says it. Usually the rabbi's there, Adonai our God and God of our ancestors. We acknowledge that all life is in your hands. May it be your will to send healing to. Yet if the end is imminent, may it reflect your love and atone for all those times that Plony, that's John Doe, could have done better. Grant him the reward of the righteous and give him eternal life in your presence. Guardian of the bereaved, protect this person and his beloved family, for their lives are interconnected in this bond of love. In your hand lies his spirit. You have redeemed him. And then these are the hardest words. Adonai, God of truth. That when you hear of someone's death, you say, Baruch atah Adonai Dayan ha'amet. Blessed are you, God, the true judge. These are very difficult ones. And then we say, the Shema, we praise God's glorious sovereignty throughout time. Adonai reigns. Adonai has reigned. Adonai shall reign forever. Adonai is God. Adonai is God. So that is the Vidui. Now, at this moment that we saw Leslie transition after she had awakened in some state to be with us and gave us this last gift of animation, because you know when that person falls asleep, and we got there, it was just a little late to see her one more time. And then to see her one more time was, not words for it. Then, what you begin to have a sense of is that there are those on the other side. And sometimes you hear, those of you in hospice have heard this from me, that people will call for a parent. They'll sense this one. As now interesting, Leslie sensed Michael. Michael means, who is like you, God, literally. So this is the God of mystery. I mean, there's Michael on your right, there's Raphael. She was Raphaela of healing. Gabriel, thank you. God of strength, discipline, severity, limitation, toughness. And then Uriel, the God of vision, the God you see and who helps you to see. Leslie, who are you, this one, I'm about to meet? So, take the ethical will information home. Wednesday, we'll begin with that. But I'm going to invite you in this ethical will to think about this. First of all, make it very personal. Who you really want to address. If you have children, they're natural, but maybe not. Maybe not. Whomever you may want to address. Our tradition teaches us that when the time comes, that there we are, and we find ourselves on the other side, and we understand that this dying process is very difficult, because the body and soul love each other. They've been together a while. They're lovers. Very hard. Especially someone like Leslie, who was like such a vessel. I mean, such a skier, such a yogi. I mean, God, in her presence, you just could feel, as she said, I'm healthier than a horse except for the cancer. So such a vessel. And you can imagine how much that spirit was really in love with this body. I mean, this spirit was really locked out, had a really good match with this. So the struggle for Leslie was really intense. Then the rabbis say, is death difficult? And Rabbi Yochanan apparently comes back to one of his disciples who gets to ask him this question. Yochanan, what's it like? to die. Piece of cake. It's as taking a hair out of milk. That's what the term says. Taking a hair out of milk. You all think koans are interesting? Try this one. It's like, death is described as taking a hair out of milk. What were they thinking about? I can't tell you, but it was interesting. But that was the image, just taking a hair out of milk. Then, when you're on the other side, this is not so nice. This is another hard moment. And that's where those loved ones on the other side and the Kaddish that's being said here help the transition. If you have children and they're saying Kaddish for you, it's easier to get on the other side because you know they're not robbing banks. They're doing what you'd hope they do. When a child is born in a Jewish family, they say, you know, my child, no, my Kaddish, very cheerful, my Kaddish, I have a Kaddish now. But the idea that someone is saying Kaddish for you, who loved you, makes it easier to transition. So that's one of the reasons we do it. That's one of the reasons. And so in this ethical will, just to give you a little bit of a head start, think about what you know. Everybody in this room has lived long enough to know something. What would you like your kid to know? What would you like the next generation to know? That you know. What would you like to leave them with? Read Shalom Aleichem, and it's attached, there's another one there, Randy Friedman, who actually is Debbie Friedman's record producer. And,
No relation, but same last
exactly, exactly. And I liked hers especially because I think we could all relate to hers easily, you know. You should raise up certain subjects, like intermarriage, you know. What you feel that you can say, it's not so much a form of control, but as an act of generosity. Let me say these words to you now while I'm feeling great. Imagine what your preference might be. Would you like them opened next year at Rosh Hashanah to have a conversation with everybody so people should know what you're thinking about? Or do you not want them opened until you're on the other side? This is another question. So I would say come in with, you know, just a little bit, and we'll work some more on it on Wednesday to sort of build on this a little bit. The book that's there, so that your will lives on, or whatever it's called, is really quite wonderful. And I think that really, that the idea that you're thinking about offering this gift while you're, we hope, in a place where you hope to be here for a while, this is the time to really sort of think about how you'd like to be remembered. Is there any final, yes?
I'm on my way to Connecticut on Wednesday, but I'd like to just
please
say
tell us
that
a little bit, yes.
when I was writing it, I became very conscious of the things that I had been holding back, sharing with my boys especially. And it helped me to stop having that reservation. I still, my boys are boys, you know, they're embarrassed by their mother.
Yeah.
And so I had found during their teenage years and early 20s that I had become very hesitant about sharing things that were important to me. And so and I would, writing this thing, I would just sob my way through. Thank God for computers, because I didn't have to get the papers wet. I mean, it was so powerful and wonderful and sweet, bittersweet. But it's helped me.
So you can share part of yourself that you couldn't
Right.
before.
That I don't, like,
very
why, even though I don't anticipate having it opened ahead of time,
Right.
why am I waiting
Right.
with some of these things?
Well, are you going to give it to them? I don't know yet.
I don't know yet. It's in process. I don't want to open it up until it's complete. And,
Right.
I mean, even sweet things like, why did I name them what I named them? And who, you know,
That's
little
right.
things that
That's
I
right.
wish I knew
Wonderful.
about my own name. And,
Sure. Maybe how you met their father.
Right.
Things like this.
exactly,
That's
yeah,
right.
Sweet
Giving them
stories. It can go on forever. Computers are great.
stories are wonderful.
Yeah.
No, especially stories that you haven't told.
About them also, yeah.
That's right. Well, good. Thank you. Anybody else?
Well, I just wanted to say that the impoundment was really strong for me because my mother, we had to take her off of feeding tube and water and, long hospice. We could do it because of a living will, but the rabbi at the hospice also explained that. And that when you have to make a choice, because of modern medicine,
That's right.
that somebody could actually be physically alive, and it was the same as, the woman who was taken off of life support last year, the same.
That's right.
We're put in these positions because of modern day medicine,
Right.
where we have to play God, and we have to be,
That's right.
so to know that in the Torah,
That's
in the Talmud, you said,
Yeah.
is it in the Talmud?
Yes.
It's 2,000 years ago, it actually gives us some kind of
That's right.
a basis, so we don't have to feel,
That's right.
One doesn't feel such
Right.
guilt.
Don't hasten death and don't prolong it, the dying process. It's exactly correct.
and what does it mean for, respirator is one thing, but what if you take them off the
Feeding
respirator?
tubes, all that. That's right.
As a feeding tube and water when somebody can't take care of themselves, is that also an impediment?
Right, and then we really wonder what is life? What do we understand life to be? You remind me, I forgot to say what actually, so that when you find yourself face to face, there are 4 questions that you're asked. And here's what that voice will ask you. First question, what do you think God's going to ask you at the end of the day? What's going to be the big question?
Well, the question I always hear, the way I always hear it stated is, he will not ask, why was I not like Moses?
Right.
He will ask, why was I not more like Michael?
That's definitely true. That's definitely true. This is a different paragraph, but that's right.
Okay.
That's correct. That's absolutely right.
I feel better.
That's right. That's good. That's good. That's very important that you were put here, as every snowflake is different. Each of us was put here for. We were born. The first letter of the Torah is a bet, and it means not only in the beginning, as King James wrote it, but also for the sake of these things. Heaven and earth. God created heaven and earth. So there were things that were here before, but it was for their sake. And each one of us has a bet attached to our soul. Each one of us is here for something. It will take us a lifetime, maybe, to know what it is, and maybe not even at the end of our lives will we completely understand what the bet was about. But we do know a few things. The first question we're asked is not whether we ate cheeseburgers. That I'm sure of. Did we eat lobster? Did we have bacon and eggs? Did we keep Shabbos? Wrong. The first question in the other paragraph is, how did we do business? How did we do business? Were we fair? How do we do business with everybody? Not just over money, but in relationship. My father would always say, I'd ask him something, and he said, depends on who you're doing business with. And I could never understand that as a kid, like I'm not in business, I'm 10 years old, but then I came to understand, how we do business with each other. Second question. Did you set aside time to study every day? For the sake of heaven. Did you learn something you didn't know before? This is a wonderful thing to do, not just to get smarter, but to get humility and to keep, as some traditions describe it, a child's mind, a beginning mind. 3. This one is difficult because this one has not been for all of us. Did we have children? But the importance of that one is, I think, is did we live in a generative way in this life? Did we mentor and nurture? And finally, did we keep hope for the future? So in writing your ethical will, because the real intention of this is, as Roseanne said, to open her own heart to herself, to get to know oneself better, to look at if we live differently after we've written the ethical will, it's really provided its main basis. And what good it does our children, maybe it will, maybe it won't, who knows? That part we can't control. But the intention of this is to look at our own lives now. Because there is a meditation, there's a Jewish meditation, probably other traditions have it, where you sit and you envision yourself as a skeleton. I've tried this, I can't do this, but you can do it yourself, but anyway, but the idea is that, that you really want to live your life differently in the shadow of death. And it's a mitzvah to draw near those who have walked through this place and who are suffering now as mourners. But really, 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 invariably, every mitzvah that we give, we receive 1,000 times more. So, Claudia.
Rabbi, because as I told you, when I faced my own reality and then I had the time to think, and when you said, how would you like to be remembered? Since I have essentially, I don't have any children, who's going to, and there's a part, I always say a Native American prayer, and that's what I told my companion. I only want you to do the last 2 lines, that I may come when the sun has set, when the sun is setting, that I may come to you with clean hands. And that's all I want.
Yeah, that's plenty.
I should say.
That's plenty. Absolutely. Absolutely. Is everybody okay? Is anybody not okay? Because this is, this is a big subject for them.
May I finish with a lighter story of death? My grandmother. It was in Corsica, in a little village, and she was old, and she had been like a little child all her life, very generous and very adorable, as there is many children, and went through life giving and never complaining, one of those beings. And she was going to die the same way she had lived. So she was in her bed after some kind of flu, but she was really dying of old age. She was 94 maybe. She did not really know her age, because at that time when she was born, it was not really recorded. And so everybody was around her bed, and the neighbors, and they had closed the windows, and everybody was kind of silent. And she was still alive, and the neighbor comes in, the cousin of my mother, and she makes a little bit of noise. So my grandmother in Corsican say, who is it? Who is that? And when say, well, it's Antoinette. Is she making too much noise for you? She said, no, I'm a little bit hard of hearing. Tell her to speak louder because I cannot hear what she's saying. She was alive until the last minute in a totally beautiful way. I mean, we were closing the window and not making noise, but she wanted to be part of it.
That's wonderful. Thank you for that. That's great. Let me just say that on Tuesday night, we'll meet again, and Fleur Green, who does wonderful work in dream interpretation and has participated in Joan Halifax's Death and Dying workshops at Upaya, will also come to Hamakom, and she asked me if theologically she could be skidding off ground, and I said, in this community, I couldn't see how she could possibly do that. So she's going to help us with her dreams. So she asked me to invite you to be thinking about any dreams you may have had, and to have you work on dreams between now and then. So see if you can hatch some for us. And thank you again for doing this.
And I just have a basic request, and that is, if we like to keep our gatherings fragrance-free, that means we ask you to please not wear any perfume, cologne, scented oils, scented body products, scented hair products, all those things, because a number of people in our group are extremely sensitive to those. So we really appreciate your attention to coming fragrance-free. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, good. And also, if we could do something with these chairs.
Actually, I think the chairs can stay because
Chairs are cool.
we're meeting in here tomorrow night for a class.
Oh, okay, fine.
and
Okay, fine.
I don't
I
think
could
the
put
church
it
is
in.
going to want to